Social media has had a profound impact on the way we think, conceptualize, ideate, create, perceive things around us, and just in general, the way we connect to the world. The impact of social media on human thinking patterns is a very complex phenomenon. It's not something that can be explained purely in terms of black and white, that it's either very good or it's either very bad. Like all human things, it falls somewhere in between, in the gray zone. But one thing can be said for certain, that the phenomenal rise in the popularity and consumption patterns of social media over the past 10-15 years has wreaked havoc on our attention span. We're constantly bombarded with so much of stimuli. Literally there's visual stimuli floating all around us 24 into 7. There's reels, there's videos, there's long form content, there's short form content, all kinds of content vying for our attention. And it really sort of results in a kind of massive brain overload, which has made us anxious, and it has also terribly shortened our attention span. Now, according to recent research studies, the current screen attention span of an average adult is approximately 47 seconds. That sounds crazy, right? But that's what research suggests. So this shortened attention span, and the way our concentration skills have been impacted, this has obviously had a detrimental impact on our reading abilities as well. And it's not just beginners, but also seasoned readers. I bet like now these days, with the impact of social media, you cannot find a person who can concentrate on sort of reading a book, just sit quietly in a corner, read a book without checking their phone after every half an hour. There'll be exceptions, will be all obviously there all the time, but I think most people, sort of, even if they're seasoned readers, cannot sort of, sit and read a book without any distractions for more than an hour. So, social media, like I said, has wreaked havoc on our concentration span, which has definitely impacted our reading skills. So, especially for beginners, it, calls for different kind of exercises, different kind of engagement to develop your reading skills in the age of social media. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Rati here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about reading in the times of social media, and especially for beginners, how to sort of instead of fighting this shortened attention span because of social media, digital media overload, how do they find how do you work your way around it? We are going to talk about that, and I'm going to give you some tips for developing your reading skills. So my first tip would be to, get back to the good old community storytelling mode. Now, you guys, if you remember, whether you're a Gen Z or a millennial, you would remember either your grandparents, reciting you stories in bed, or, you getting exposed to some kind of storytelling sessions, getting involved in community storytelling sessions in school or college, where a bunch of you get together, and you kind of do a formal sort of reading session in which all of you are reading aloud. When we were kids, we had this in school all the time. We were reading aloud the chapters aloud in front of other people, and everybody in the class was at some point of time made to stand up and read the chapter aloud. So social media obviously has kind of wreaked havoc with that kind of good old community feel, and those community storytelling sessions have kind of vanished, but I would say revive those sessions, and trust me guys, it would work wonders on your concentration skills. And after a couple of such sessions, you would actually feel like picking up a book, and your concentration skills, your attention span would really improve. Now, how to organize these community storytelling sessions? Nothing fancy. You just need to get together with a bunch of like-minded book lovers, a bunch of friends who love reading books, and organize an informal storytelling session in a cafe or a public place. It can be a park, a garden, or even your home for that matter. Just 4 or 5 book lovers getting together. You can do serialized readings of a novel. That way you're more committed. Every week you meet up once and you read a chapter amongst yourselves, and that way you finish a novel within a couple of months, or if you don't have that kind of time commitment, you can just cover one short story, whatever works for you. But the point is, the way these community storytelling sessions are conducted, you're obviously not reading quietly to yourself, but you're reading sort of loudly in front of other people. So the way it works is that if you have 5 of you, and you're reading a short story, then a couple of stanzas are read by one person, then the second person takes on from there, and so on and so forth. It's of course like, if you want to add a bit more fun and dramatic element to it, you can also read plays. Play reading really works well, because you have the added advantage of playing different characters, and there's a bit of like sort of dramatic performance involved. So, if you're performance oriented, that can be interesting as well. But whatever the point is, trust me, guys, after you've been doing these community storytelling sessions after a couple of months or participating in these, not just a couple of months, even a couple of weeks, you will notice, a change, and you would actually feel like picking up a book and reading it. For one, it's sort of, social, it's socially vibrant, you're meeting so many new people, it's exciting, it's mentally relaxing, it really relaxes you mentally. And the best thing is, at least for the duration when you're participating in those reading storytelling sessions, you would stay away from your phone. Of course, it's not easy. In the beginning, you would be fidgety and you would have this urge to check your phone after every 15-20 minutes. Trust me, guys, I do it all the time. Even when I'm conversing with a friend, just having a chit chat, I have this really bad habit of, sort of kind of fidgeting with my phone, which of course looks socially very bad. But that's the way we all have become these days, unfortunately, surrounded by social media. And there's just so much of anxiety that if you don't look at your phone like every half an hour, it's like the world will disappear or something like that. But initially, your phone will trouble you, but once you get used to these sessions and you get absorbed, then trust me, guys, your social media hangover will also lessen automatically, and your reading skills would witness tremendous improvement. The second thing I would recommend to beginner readers especially is that, instead of trying to read everything in one go, just pace it out during the course of the day. So for example, if you have to read if you plan to read like 30 pages in a day, then instead of trying to sort of sit for 2 hours and read those 30 pages, it's better to sort of work with a shortened concentration span and, sort of read up, like divide it up within, different chunks of time. So for example, devote half an hour in the morning, maybe after you get up, when you don't have to do anything specific and you just want to relax. Then, maybe an hour in the afternoon before lunch or after lunch, whatever works for you best. And maybe like half an hour in the afternoon and maybe half an hour in the night. Even if you can't devote half an hour, you cannot concentrate for half an hour, that's perfectly fine. Even short bursts of 15-20 minutes a couple of times a day are sort of good enough. You would realize that instead of sort of trying to fight or shorten attention span and trying to sit for an hour and getting distracted again and again and read everything in one go, it's better to do these sort of read little by little in these short spurts of time during the course of the day, divided evenly. And by the end of the day, you would have actually finished your sort of reading goals for that day. So the trick is, like I said, instead of trying to fight or shorten attention span, you have to cleverly, strategically find a way around it. Also, keep it simple, guys. We are already surrounded by a lot of complexities, and we are bombarded with a lot of predominantly negative content. I think more than 50% of feed in our social media universe is consists of these really sort of negative news, doomsday scenarios. A lot of social media has really amplified the negative stuff. Not that the negative stuff wasn't happening in the world before the onset of social media, but since social media sort of amplifies everything to the degree of infinity, your mind is already very overwhelmed with news, views, perspectives, and whatnot. So I think we as readers, and especially beginner readers, we need to get back to the roots, to kind of get back to those old community settings and to rekindle sort of those human associations, human bonding, the relevance of human emotions in this increasingly wired world. So classics always work. I recommend, especially for beginner readers, that read the classics, get back to the classes. Simple, straightforward writing style, nothing fancy, but very, very pleasurable, enjoyable reading, and very, very profound messages. Children's literature also I would recommend. I think it's a huge misconception, guys, that children's literature is literally meant for kids. It can be read at so many different levels, and it really, really relaxes your brain cells, and sort of stimulates imagination, gets you back into that, storytelling, good old-fashioned storytelling, imagination mode. When it was COVID, during the times of COVID, I started reading a lot of Ruskin Bond books. Now, Ruskin Bond is primarily considered a children's writer in India, but his works can be read at so many levels. The language is simple. They are sort of like very pleasing to read, but there's a lot of depth, they can be read at so many levels. This commentary on environment, the focus on conserving the environment, nature, and then there are these little quirks and idiosyncrasies of human behavior, which have been revealed so beautifully in Ruskin Bond's novels. You meet these fascinating characters, especially. You meet a lot of very unconventional, fascinating women characters, and, then there is this sort of there's this kind of gothic feel as well, because associated with nature, this very kind of like gothic kind of feel. So it's amazing what the different levels at which children's literature can be interpreted. So I thoroughly enjoyed reading Ruskin Bond during COVID. So what I'm trying to say, I guess, essentially, is that for beginner readers, reading, stuff like classics and children's literature, it really sort of helps you relax your mind, get back to the roots, get back to the basics, and your concentration span, your attention span will slowly improve if you just keep up with it. Also books like there's this new genre doing the rounds, which is called I'm trying to remember, I made a video of it, the name. It's not motivational books. Yeah, it's healing fiction books. The healing fiction genre. I'm going to link back the video as well. Healing fiction is a very popular emerging genre, and it's again those very soothing books which are sort of written simply. Although simplicity should not be confused with superficiality. Just because the language is simple, it's accessible to everyone, doesn't mean that it's superficial stuff. It can be pretty deep stuff too, but it's something which is just easier to read. And I think in these wired times, it makes sense to read that kind of stuff. Lastly, I would recommend that you got to have your own unique set of rituals to dissociate yourselves, to distance yourselves from social media every once in a while. And guys, everybody is different. Everybody has a unique disposition, temperament. So I cannot give you a generic set of rituals, that would work for you. It has to be something which, it should be your own doing. You have to sort of create those rituals according to your temperament and what works for you. But I can give you examples, like what I've been doing to trying to distance myself from social media. So I do a lot of writing work, so it's really distracting with my phone. Obviously, I'm carrying my phone with me all the time, and I have this urge to check WhatsApp messages every 15 hours, and there's some buzz, some message on Instagram, WhatsApp, this and that. It's really annoying, and it really interferes with my writing, since I have to do a lot of writing work professionally. So what I've started doing since the past couple of months, an year almost, is that I kind of consciously log off my phone's internet, disconnect my phone's internet for like an hour and a half, and then of course I sort of switch it on back. I take a break for 5 minutes and just generally check any messages or scroll through quickly if I want to, but not more than 5-10 minutes. That's my rule. And then I follow the same pattern, the same cycle. And of course, I don't have the luxury to switch off my phone. I wish I did, because I have work related messages on WhatsApp. But this thing of switching off my phone's internet for even if it's for an hour and a half, and then sort of repeating these cycles, it has really helped me in terms of gathering, improving my concentration for writing and even for reading on the web, because otherwise my concentration was just going all over the place. So, this is something which you can do if it's doable for you. The second thing, that really works is, even simple things like making it a point to spend weekends outdoors, in terms of like either hanging out with friends, going for a coffee with a friend, or just simply even sitting in a cafe and reading a book all by yourself. The point is you need to get out of your house, and if those things are also not possible, then you might just check out the local events calendar in your city, go for like art exhibitions, cultural things, even go for any random talk or seminar. Trust me, guys, even going for a random going for a talk to attend a talk on a random topic you have no clue about is infinitely better than, sort of being parked in front of the television, because that will invariably lead you towards browsing social media, and it kind of gets like, a sort of banality, sort of vicious circle of banality, and it just, your attention span will get further deteriorated. So, those I think revitalizing offline communities is the need of the hour. Anything basically which gets you inspired, tap into your intuitive self, and sort of anything which sort of rekindles that serendipity in you, that sense of serendipity, be it a book, or an interesting sort of painting, or something you encountered during your regular walks and encounter with nature. Basically the idea is to tap into your intuitive self and capture that serendipity of being. It will certainly help with your attention span and help you develop your reading skills further. So guys, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. If you like the content, please to press the like button, and please to subscribe to the channel. Also, like many of you already know about, I primarily talk about books, literature, creative writing, and sometimes with a bit of cultural stuff also thrown in this channel. So if you have any ideas for the kind of videos I should make, anything you would like me to cover for this channel, please do let me know. So guys, that's it for today. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.